The millionaire was about to foreclose on a bankrupt woman's house, but he saw a girl sewing alone in a dark room. Her face made him shudder. She was identical to his deceased daughter. In that instant, he knew this visit would change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The morning began like any other in the luxurious office on the 30th floor of the Milano building. Richard. Morgan adjusted his Italian silk tie in front of the mirror in his office while watching the city awaken below. His cold eyes scanned the urban landscape like someone analyzing numbers on a spreadsheet. Each building, each street, each small moving point was just another variable in his daily equation of power and control. The financial empire he had, inherited from his parents, had tripled under his command over the past 15 years. Morgan Holdings was now the largest real estate investment conglomerate in the country, with a portfolio extending across 5 states. His routine was meticulously planned: wake up at 5:30 a.m., work out in his private gym, protocol breakfast, morning meetings, afternoon inspections. A predictable and secure cycle. Sarah, his assistant for more than a decade, entered the room with the traditional black folder containing the day's reports. "Mr. Morgan, we have 3 inspections scheduled for this afternoon. The first is in Westbrook Heights, a high-end apartment. The second is a house in Oakwood Hills, also an upscale area. And the third," she hesitated briefly, "is a residence in Spring Valley." Richard raised his eyes from his laptop screen. Spring Valley was a peripheral neighborhood, something unusual on his agenda. "How did one of our properties end up there?" he questioned, more to himself than to Sarah. "It's an old mortgage, sir, from your father's time. The owner is 3 months behind and, according to the legal department, hasn't shown interest in negotiating." He nodded mechanically. Numbers were numbers, regardless of the zip code. His job was simple: visit, assess, repossess. That's how the empire stayed solid. That's how the gears kept turning. The morning proceeded as planned. 2 meetings with investors, a strategic lunch with an influential politician, everything perfectly timed. At 2 p.m., his black Audi RS7 glided through the city streets, driven by Mark, his trusted driver of many years. The first 2 inspections were routine. Indebted owners trying to negotiate, offering guarantees they didn't possess. Richard maintained his professional stance, repeating the business mantra about deadlines and responsibilities. It was just another day at the office. When the car began to enter Spring Valley, the landscape changed dramatically. The well-maintained asphalt gave way to potholed streets. The mansions with their geometrically trimmed gardens were replaced by simple houses, some with exposed bricks. Children played barefoot in the street, and the smell of open sewage betrayed the historic abandonment by public authorities. "Are you sure it's here, Mark?" asked Richard, checking the address again on his tablet. "Yes, sir. 237 Maple Street." The car stopped in front of a small house with peeling paint and a small, unkempt garden. Soft music from inside the residence mingled with the noise of children playing in the street. Richard adjusted his Italian suit and got out of the vehicle, his Oxford shoes stepping cautiously on the uneven ground. The door of the house was ajar. He knocked lightly, but there was no response. After a few seconds of waiting, he pushed the door carefully, announcing his presence. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Grace Wilson." What he found on the other side of that door made his perfectly organized world begin to crumble. A girl of approximately 12 years old was sitting in front of an old sewing machine. Her fingers, covered with improvised bandages, moved skillfully over the fabric. But it wasn't the scene itself that disturbed him. It was the girl's eyes. Eyes that he knew, that had haunted his dreams for years. Eyes identical to those of Emily, his sister. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. His legs weakened slightly, and he needed to support himself on the doorframe. The girl stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and distrust, without stopping her sewing. In that moment, his entire world of numbers, spreadsheets, and predictability began to collapse. The resemblance was too disturbing to ignore. Richard remained standing at the door while his mind tried to process what his eyes were seeing. The girl continued her work, as if his presence was just another detail in her focused routine. "Is your mother home?" he managed to ask after a few moments. "She's working. She won't be back until evening." The girl's voice was firm, showing no fear or intimidation. "Are you the bank man?" Richard hesitated before answering. For the first time in years, his title of successful businessman seemed more of a burden than a source of pride. "Yes, I came to talk about the house." The girl finally stopped sewing and looked at him directly. "Are you going to try to take our home away?" The question came without beating around the bush, carrying a maturity that didn't match her age. "No, I came to check the situation." The words came out different from the script he usually used. "What's your name?" "Sophie." She went back to sewing, her injured fingers dancing over the fabric with precision. "I'm finishing some repairs to help my mom pay the bills." Richard observed the environment. The small living room was clean and organized despite the old furniture. On the walls, some technical drawings caught his attention. They were detailed sketches of machines and electrical circuits made by hand with surprising precision. "Did you make these drawings?" he asked, approaching one of the walls. "Yes, I like to study how things work." Sophie paused, adjusting something on the sewing machine. "This one, for example, I fixed it myself. I learned by watching videos at the community library. The old singer had visible adaptations, improvised parts, repurposed wires, an ingenuity that transformed necessity into talent." Richard felt something stir inside him, a distant memory of Emily tinkering with her inventions in her childhood room. "Your mother, did she work at Morgan Textile Factory?" The question escaped before he could contain it. Sophie stopped again, this time with a more cautious look. "Yes, a long time ago. How do you know that?" Richard didn't answer. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably Sarah reminding him of the afternoon meetings. But for the first time in years, the commitments seemed insignificant compared to what he was discovering. "I need to go now," he said, retreating toward the door. "Tell your mother I'll come back another day." Back in the car, Richard couldn't concentrate. The images mixed in his mind. Sophie's eyes, so similar to Emily's. The technical drawings on the wall. The old textile factory where his older brother, David, had been a supervisor before his premature departure. "To the office, sir?" asked Mark, looking through the rearview mirror. "No, to my home." Richard needed his personal files, needed to understand what was happening. "And cancel all my afternoon commitments." As the car crossed the city, Richard felt that something bigger than a simple mortgage was at stake. That visit was unearthing, secrets that his family had worked hard to keep hidden. And for the first time in a long time, the numbers in his spreadsheets seemed not to have all the answers. In his apartment, he spent hours going through old albums and stored documents. He found a photo of Emily smiling, with the same features he had seen in Sophie. Next to it, an image of David at the old factory, his serious face hiding secrets that were now beginning to emerge. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. His dreams were populated by sewing machines that worked by themselves, by endless corridors of an abandoned factory, and by a girl who carried on her face the ghost of two people he had lost. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sun had not yet risen when he entered the dead files of the company, a labyrinth of metal shelves in the basement of the building. The smell of old paper and dust permeated the air while his hands went through folders yellowed by time. "Personnel Department, Textile Factory, 1995 to 2000, he muttered to himself, pulling out a heavy folder. His fingers trembled slightly as he leafed through the documents, looking for a name that hadn't left his mind since the previous day. Grace Wilson. After almost 2 hours of methodical searching, he found what he was looking for. The employment record was there, with a faded 3x4 photo stapled in the upper corner. Grace Wilson, hired in March 1997 as a seamstress, fine finishing department. Supervisor in charge, David Morgan. Richard sat on the dusty floor, completely forgetting about his $3,000 Italian suit. He continued reading, numerous compliments for productivity, promotion to department leader in 1998, and then a request for leave for medical reasons in January 1999. The document was incomplete, with pages clearly torn out. Intrigued, he sought more information in the company's digital system. Grace's record showed an attempt at a labor lawsuit that had been mysteriously archived. There were no details about the reason for the action, just a cryptic note. Confidential agreement, direct determination from the presidency. Richard vaguely remembered that time. He had recently graduated in business administration, still learning the intricacies of the business from his father. David was the eldest son, the right-hand man in the management of the textile factory, until his sudden departure in mid-1999. The family never spoke openly about the matter. A file clerk, surprised to find the company president there so early, approached offering help. Richard took the opportunity to request all documents related to labor lawsuits from that period. The woman returned half an hour later with a dusty box. Among administrative papers and financial reports, something caught his attention. A brown envelope sealed with the inscription "Personal DM" in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, he found a letter that had been torn and subsequently taped back together. The date, January 15, 1999. "Grace, I know these words are not enough, but I need to put them on paper, even if they never reach you. Fear and cowardice made me make decisions I deeply regret. When you told me about the pregnancy, I should have been man enough to take responsibility. Instead, I allowed my father and his lawyers to turn this into another business problem to be solved. There is no justification for my actions. You deserved more, much more, and this child, my daughter, deserved a present father, not a coward who hides behind the family name. Perhaps one day I will find the courage to do what is right. Until then, I carry with me this guilt that corrodes me every day. David." Richard had to lean on the shelf to keep from falling. The letter, never sent, confirmed his suspicions. Sophie was David's daughter, his niece. The financial empire he was so proud to command had also been built on secrets and injustices, like that one. He returned to his office carrying copies of the documents he had found. Sarah, his assistant, was visibly concerned about his disappearance during the morning. "Mr. Morgan, the board is waiting for the 10 a.m. meeting. You didn't respond to the messages. Cancel it." The firmness in his voice surprised even himself. "Cancel all commitments for this week and prepare a complete survey of all the archived labor lawsuits from the old textile factory, all of them, Sarah, especially those that were closed with confidential agreements. But sir, that could take days, and the board can wait." Richard looked out the window of his office, observing the city that now seemed different to his eyes. There are more important things that need to be resolved. He picked up his phone and dialed the legal department. "I need you to immediately suspend any repossession action at the Spring Valley address and prepare the documentation for property transfer. Yes, definitive transfer." As he spoke, his eyes fell on an old photo on his desk. Him, David, and Emily, still children, smiling, at a distant Christmas. The image, which previously brought only nostalgia, now carried the weight of long-buried secrets. The sun was already setting when Richard parked his car again in Spring Valley. This time, he wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple shirt and jeans, a conscious attempt to appear less intimidating. He carried with him a folder with the documents he'd found, and something more. An old electrical circuit project that Emily had designed in her adolescence. He approached the house with hesitant steps. Now he could see details he hadn't noticed during his first visit. A small garden with medicinal herbs, handmade curtains in the windows, a discreet sign announcing "Clothing repairs, ask for Mrs. Grace." Before he could knock, the door opened. Grace Wilson was standing in front of him, older than in the employment record photo, but with the same determined eyes. "I was expecting you to return, Mr. Morgan." Richard felt the weight of that surname like never before. "Mrs. Wilson, I need to talk to you about the past, about David, about—" "Come in." She interrupted him, her voice firm but not hostile. "Sophie is at the community library. We can talk without rush." The living room was different from the last time. The sewing machine had been moved to a corner, and on the table were cups of freshly brewed coffee. Grace had prepared for this conversation. "So you finally found out," she said, serving the coffee. "I thought this day would come sooner or later. David had the same eyes as her, you know? The same way of furrowing her brow when she's concentrating. Richard held the cup tightly, searching for words. Why did you never contact us? After David, after he left, you could have... Contact? For what? Grace let out a bitter laugh. For your father to send more lawyers with silence agreements, to see my daughter treated like a mistake to be hidden. No, Mr. Morgan, Sophie deserved more than that. She rose and went to a small chest on the shelf, removing a yellowed envelope. I kept David's letter. He never had the courage to deliver it personally, but someone left it at my door after he departed. Richard recognized the paper. It was the other half of the letter he had found earlier. Pheope, you always knew I would come. Not you specifically, but I knew that truth has its own time to come to light. Grace sat down again, her eyes fixed on Richard's. Sophie is brilliant, you know. She has a gift for machines that even she doesn't fully understand. Just like your sister Emily. The mention of Emily's name made Richard shudder. How do you know about her? David talked about her a lot. The little inventor sister who spent hours taking apart devices to understand how they worked. Grace smiled slightly. When Sophie started doing the same thing, I understood that some things are stronger than blood or money. Richard opened his folder, taking out the circuit project. This is a drawing that Emily made shortly before leaving us. When I saw Sophie's drawings on the wall, it was like going back in time. Grace took the paper carefully, her calloused fingers tracing the lines of the project. What do you intend to do now, Mr. Morgan? Have you come to offer money to keep our silence? Or have you come to really meet your niece? I came to do what's right. Richard placed the house transfer documents on the table. This place now, officially, belongs to you and Sophie. And there's more. I found other cases like yours in the company. Other families who were silenced with agreements and threats. I intend to correct each one of them. And your empire. Will your board accept this peacefully? My empire? Richard looked around at that simple but vibrant living room. Maybe it needs to learn that there are more valuable things than financial statements. The sound of the door opening interrupted the conversation. Sophie entered carrying some books from the library, her eyes widening at seeing Richard there. But before anyone could say anything, she noticed the circuit project on the table. What an amazing drawing! She approached, curious. It looks like an automation system, but it has some modifications I've never seen before. Richard and Grace exchanged a look. There was so much to be said, so many truths to be revealed. But at that moment, seeing Sophie leaning over Emily's project with the same gleam in her eyes, Richard understood that the revelations needed to happen at the right time. In the boardroom on the 30th floor, the atmosphere was one of palpable tension. Richard was seated at the head of the table, facing the incredulous looks of the board members. In front of him, a stack of red folders contained the cases he had discovered in recent days. Dozens of stories similar to Grace's, all carefully hidden over the years. What you're suggesting is insane, Richard. Albert Mendenhall, the oldest board member, hit the table forcefully. These cases are prescribed, the agreements were signed. We can't simply reopen these wounds. Wounds that never healed, Albert. Richard kept his voice calm, but firm. Each of these folders represents a family that was harmed by our company. An automatic irrigation system. With a solar timer. Sophie finally looked at him, a small smile of pride on her lips. I use daylight to regulate when the plants need water. It saves more. Emily would have loved to see this. The words escaped before he could contain them. Who is Emily? Sophie asked, her scientific curiosity immediately awakened. Why don't we go inside? It's a story your mother needs to hear too. Grace was waiting for them in the living room, which was different. The sewing machine had been cleaned and reorganized, and on the table were a homemade cake and tea. It was as if she knew that this night would be special. I brought something that belonged to my sister. Richard took the diary from his folder, placing it on the table. Emily was special. Like you, Sophie. She saw the world through machines, circuits, the possibilities of creating something new. Sophie approached the diary, her eyes shining. With curiosity, Grace remained silent, observing the scene with a mixture of apprehension and hope. She discovered things about the company, About how my father conducted business. Richard continued, his voice soft. And just like you, she had a natural talent for fixing what was broken. He opened the diary to a specific page where there was a detailed project for a ventilation system for the old textile factory. She drew this when she was about your age, Sophie. It was a system that could have improved the working conditions of hundreds of employees. Why was it never implemented? Sophie asked, studying the drawing with professional attention. Because some people prefer to profit from the problem rather than invest in the solution, Grace answered, her voice carrying years of experience. Isn't that right, Mr. Morgan? Richard, he gently corrected. Please call me Richard. And yes, you're right, but that's changing. Today, the company began a process of recognition and reparation for all cases like yours. And what did that decision cost? Grace asked, serving the tea. Some stocks plummeted, board members threatened to resign, shareholders are furious. Richard accepted the offered cup. But you know what's interesting. For the first time in years, I can sleep in peace. Sophie, who was absorbed in Emily's projects, raised her head. They're similar to some ideas I have. Look. She ran to the wall where her own drawings were hung, pointing out surprising similarities. Talent runs in the blood, Grace murmured, more to herself than to the others. Sophie, Richard began, carefully choosing his words, would you like to learn more about your Aunt Emily's projects? I have all her notebooks saved and… Aunt? Sophie interrupted, her eyes wide, fixed on Richard. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with decades of secrets and expectations. Grace placed her cup on the table with a soft tinkle. Yes. Sophie, Emily was your aunt. Richard took a deep breath. And David, my brother, was your father. The girl stood motionless for a moment, processing the information. Then, without saying anything, she turned her attention back to Emily's drawings, her fingers tracing the lines with a new understanding. You have his eyes, Richard continued softly. And Emily's talent. It's as if the best parts of our family had found their way to you. Sophie finally turned, facing Richard with an intensity that reminded him of both David and Emily. Can I see her other projects? Of course you can. Richard smiled, feeling an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. In fact, I was thinking of something more. The company is creating a foundation to support young inventors from underprivileged communities. I'd like the first project to be yours. Grace made as if to protest, but Sophie interrupted her. What kind of project? Whatever you want to. Create, with all the necessary support and resources. Richard looked at Grace, seeking her approval. It's not charity, it's your right, a heritage of talent that needs to be nurtured. That night, as Sophie enthusiastically showed her other projects, Richard observed the interaction between mother and daughter. There, in that simple house in Spring Valley, he had found something that his entire financial empire couldn't give him, a chance for redemption, a new meaning for the Morgan name. The auditorium of Morgan Holdings was packed that morning. People who were silenced with threats and money. Sarah entered the room discreetly, leaving more documents on the table. In recent days, she had become a key ally, helping Richard unearth the true extent of the harassment and labor irregularities at the old textile factory. And what about the shareholders? Questioned Patricia Miller, financial director. Do you have any idea of the impact this will have when it goes public? The company's stocks will plummet. Perhaps they need to. Richard stood up, walking to the window. Down below, the city continued its frantic movement, oblivious to the dramas unfolding in that room. We built this empire on rotten foundations. It's time to fix that. Your father, Albert began, but Richard interrupted him. My father is no longer here, and it was his decisions, along with those of the board at the time, that created this situation. He turned to face those present. I'm not asking for authorization, I'm communicating a decision. The murmur of protests was interrupted when the door opened again. It was Greg Patterson, the current legal director, carrying his laptop. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you need to see this. On the screen, a news story was about to be published on one of the largest news portals in the country. Former employees denounce cases of harassment and irregularities at Morgan Holdings. Someone leaked the story, Greg explained, his voice tense. In 2 hours, this will be in all the newspapers. Chaos installed itself in the room. Board members shouted on the phone. Others typed frantically on their cell phones. Patricia was pale, mentally calculating the financial losses that would come. "Silence!" Richard's voice cut through the tumult. "This just anticipates what we already intended to do. Greg, prepare an official statement. We're going to take responsibility and announce a reparation program for all affected families. You're going to destroy everything your father built." Albert rose, trembling with rage. "No, Albert, I'm going to rebuild on more solid foundations." Richard picked up one of the red folders. "Each story here deserves to be heard. Each injustice needs to be corrected." Leaving the meeting room, Richard went straight to his office. He needed to make an important call. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Richard. Would you mind if I stopped by tonight? There are some things we need to talk about, and I think Sophie should hear them too." Upon hanging up, his eyes fell on a photo of David on his desk. "You tried to do the right thing, brother. You just didn't have the strength to face it alone. But now I'm not alone." Sarah entered with another folder in hand. "To be, sir. Sir, I found something I think you need to see. It's about your sister, Emily. It seems she discovered some of these irregularities before she left. There was a diary of hers among the old files." Richard took the diary with trembling hands. The yellowed pages contained Emily's delicate handwriting, full of notes about the factory, about injured employees, about injustices she had witnessed. On the last page, a phrase was underlined. "I can no longer pretend I don't see. Someone needs to do something." Tears blurred his vision. Emily had always been the conscience of the family, the only one who dared to question her father's decisions. Now, years later, her words echoed like a call to action. "Sarah, prepare the car. I need to go to Spring Valley now." He put the diary in his folder. "And tomorrow I want you to organize a press conference. It's time for Morgan Holdings to learn the true meaning of social responsibility." As he descended in the elevator, Richard felt the weight of the decisions he was making. The financial empire he had inherited was about to undergo the greatest transformation in its history. But for the first time in a long time, he was sure he was on the right path. Night had already fallen when Richard arrived at Grace's house. Emily's diary weighed in his folder like lead, each page a revelation of the past that needed to be shared. This time, he didn't need to knock. Sophie was in the small front garden, tinkering with something that appeared to be an improvised irrigation system. "You came back," she said without raising her eyes from her project. There was no accusation in her voice, just a statement. "Yes, I came back, and I brought something I think you'll like to see." Richard approached, observing the girl's work. Journalists, former employees, and curious onlookers crowded for the official presentation of the Emily Morgan Foundation. On stage, Richard adjusted the microphone, while observing Sophie backstage, focused on her final adjustments to the project she would present. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Grace asked her daughter, nervously adjusting the collar of her new blouse. It was the first time she had set foot in the company headquarters since she had been fired 15 years ago. "I am, Mum." Sophie smiled, her eyes shining with the same determination she always had. "They need to see that talent doesn't depend on zip code." Richard began his speech, his voice echoing through the auditorium. For years, Morgan Holdings built its success ignoring the voices of those who most needed to be heard. Today, we begin a new chapter. The Emily Morgan Foundation is born not just as a form of reparation, but as a commitment to the future. In the front rows, some of the old board members shifted uncomfortably. Albert Mendenhall had resigned the previous week, along with 3 other board members. The company's stock had fallen 15% in recent days, but Richard remained firm in his decision. "Our first presentation today is special," continued Richard, a soft smile forming on his lips. "Our young inventor, who will show us how talent and innovation can be born anywhere, as long as they receive the appropriate opportunity." Sophie took the stage carrying her creation, a modernized and sustainable version of the old Singer sewing machine. Her project combined solar energy with a movement reuse system, allowing underprivileged communities to have access to professional equipment without depending on the electrical grid. "This is the solar sewing project," Sophie began, her initially shy voice gaining strength with each word. "Inspired by my Aunt Emily's drawings and the needs I saw growing up in Spring Valley." In the audience, several former employees of the old textile factory watched, moved. Among them, Mrs. Z, who had lost 3 fingers in the old machines, cried silently, seeing the solution that could have prevented so many accidents. "The system includes automatic protections against accidents," Sophie explained, demonstrating the safety mechanisms. "And the best part, it can be built with 70% recycled materials, making it accessible for small entrepreneurs." Richard watched with pride, recognizing in Sophie's gestures the same enthusiasm that Emily showed when presenting her projects. At the back of the auditorium, Sarah coordinated the live transmission of the event, which was already reaching thousands of views. After the presentation, while journalists jostled to ask questions, Grace approached Richard. "She shone, didn't she? Like a star," Richard replied, moved. "But the credit is yours, Grace. It was you who created this environment where she could develop her talent despite all the difficulties." "Sometimes I think about David," Grace whispered, watching Sophie answer questions with ease. "He would be proud of her." "I'm sure he would." Richard placed his hand on Grace's shoulder. "And Emily would be radiant." The event continued with the announcement of other foundation projects, scholarships for young people from underprivileged communities, professional training programs, and a specific fund to support independent inventors. With each new announcement, Richard could feel the weight of years of injustice beginning to dissipate. At the end of the presentation, Sophie was surrounded by representatives from universities and technology companies, all interested in her project. But her eyes first sought the approval of her mother and then of Richard. "Uncle," she called, the word still sounding new on her lips, "do you think Aunt Emily would have liked it?" Richard felt his heart tighten. It was the first time Sophie had called him that. "She would have loved it, Sophie, and you know something? I think she always knew that someone like you would appear one day to continue her work." That night, after all the journalists had gone and the auditorium was empty, Richard found Sophie sitting alone on the stage, leafing through Emily's diary. "You know," she said without raising her eyes, "I found a project here that could revolutionize the water distribution system in Spring Valley. If we adapted it with current technology." Richard smiled, sitting down next to her. "Why don't we start tomorrow? I'm sure Emily would love to see her projects coming to life through you." Sophie closed the diary carefully. Sometimes I feel like she's guiding me, you know? As if every drawing I make is a little bit mine and a little bit hers." "That's how the memory of special people stays alive," Richard replied, his voice soft. "Through the good they inspire in others." News of the success of the solar sewing project spread quickly. In less than a month, communities from all over the country began requesting information about the program. The small office of the Emily Morgan Foundation, initially installed in a room in the holding building, had to expand to an entire floor. Sophie began dividing her time between school and the foundation, where she personally supervised the implementation of her project in other communities. Grace, in turn, was invited to coordinate the training program for seamstresses, transforming her experience into knowledge for other women. On a particularly busy afternoon, Richard found Sophie bent over a new series of drawings in her improvised office at the foundation. The walls were covered with projects, some hers, others Emily's, creating a visual bridge between past and present. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "Today is physics lab day," Sophie replied without taking her eyes off the paper. "The teacher let me do autonomous work after I presented the solar energy project at the science fair." Richard smiled, remembering how Emily also used to negotiate with her teachers to be able to develop her own experiments. "And what are you working on now?" Sophie finally raised her eyes, a gleam of excitement on her face. "Remember the water distribution system we found in Aunt Emily's diary? I managed to adapt the project using current technology. Look." She spread the drawings on the table. Emily's original project had been transformed into something even more ambitious, an integrated system of rainwater collection, purification, and distribution that could serve not only Spring Valley, but several peripheral neighborhoods. The implementation cost would be a third of what the city currently spends, Sophie explained, pointing to her calculations, and the best part, it could be maintained by the community itself. Impressive. Richard studied the drawings carefully. But you'll face resistance. Some companies profit a lot from the current water distribution system. That's exactly why we need to change. Sophie crossed her arms, determined. We can't let the profit of a few prevent the benefit of many. That's what Aunt Emily wrote. In the diary, wasn't it? Richard felt a wave of pride and nostalgia. Yes, that's exactly what she wrote. At that moment, Grace entered the office, carrying some reports. Sophie, the university people are downstairs. They want to talk about including the solar sewing project in the extension program. I'm coming, Mom, Sophie began organizing her drawings. Uncle Richard, you're coming to the project presentation in the community on Saturday, right? I wouldn't miss it for anything. Richard smiled, watching Sophie leave the office hurriedly, leaving behind a trail of energy and enthusiasm. Grace stayed behind, looking thoughtfully at the drawings on the wall. Sometimes I wonder if we're not overwhelming her. She's still a girl. An extraordinary girl, Richard completed, like Emily was. But don't worry, we're here to ensure she has all the necessary support. You know what she told me yesterday? Grace sat down, a soft smile on her lips, that she wants to create a free technology school in Spring Valley, so that other children, like her, have the opportunity to develop their talents. Richard thought for a moment. The old textile factory warehouse is empty. We could renovate it, transform it into a center for technology and social innovation. The Emily Morgan School, Grace suggested, her eyes shining. Emily would have loved that. Richard picked up one of Sophie's drawings. You know, when I started this journey of reparation, I thought I was just correcting past mistakes. But Sophie, she's building the future. Through the window, they could see the sun setting over the city. On the horizon, lights were beginning to turn on, creating a mosaic of possibilities. Richard thought about how a simple mortgage visit had transformed into a silent revolution, changing not only his life, but that of so many other people. Grace, he called, still looking out the window. Do you think David would be proud of what we're building here? I'm sure he would, she answered, her voice soft. But more important than that, Sophie is proud of her story, of her talent, of her family, both the one she always had and the one she discovered. In the hallway, they could hear Sophie's animated voice explaining her project to university professors. The sound of her enthusiasm echoed through the corridors like a promise that the future, when built with love and purpose, can be much greater than any mistake of the past. The news arrived like thunder on a clear day. Richard was in a meeting with the foundation team when Sarah burst into the room, tablet in hand, her normally composed face showing concern. We need to talk, she said, making a discreet gesture toward the door. Now. In the hallway, Sarah showed Richard the headline that had just been published. Scandal at Morgan Holdings. Former board members accuse current president of mismanagement and destruction of family heritage. The article, signed by an influential newspaper, brought statements from Albert Mendenhall and other former board members, questioning Richard's mental sanity and suggesting that he was squandering the company's assets on baseless welfare projects. They've called an extraordinary shareholders meeting, Sarah explained, sliding her finger across the screen. They want your removal from office. Richard leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. He expected resistance, but not such a direct attack. When? 2 weeks. They already have the support of 35% of the shareholders. Before he could respond, he heard Sophie's voice coming from the end of the hallway. She was carrying a model of the Emily Morgan School project, her eyes shining with the usual enthusiasm. Uncle Richard, I solved the natural ventilation problem. Look how... She stopped upon noticing the tension in the air. Did something happen? Richard forced a smile, but Sophie was too perceptive to be fooled. Just some problems at the company, dear. Nothing you need to worry about. It's about the foundation, isn't it? Sophie placed the model on the floor carefully. I heard some employees commenting that there are people wanting to end our projects. Sarah discreetly moved away, leaving uncle and niece alone. Richard crouched down to be at eye level with Sophie. "There are people who are afraid of change," he explained softly. "People who think profit is more important than doing the right thing." "Like Grandpa thought?" Sophie's question hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. "How did you—" "I read Aunt Emily's diary to the end," Sophie answered, her eyes showing a maturity beyond her age. "She wrote about how Grandpa always chose money above everything else, even above family." Richard sat on the hallway bench, inviting Sophie to sit beside him. "You know, for a long time I was just like him. I thought success was measured only by numbers in a bank account." "And what made you change?" "You," he answered simply. "Seeing your talent, your determination, made me realize how much potential we waste when we ignore people because of their address or social condition." Sophie was silent for a moment, observing her model on the floor. "And now, will they close the foundation?" "Not if I can help it." Richard put his arm around his niece's shoulders. "But I need to be honest with you. It's going to be a tough fight." "Then we'll fight together." Sophie stood up, determined. "We can show the results of the projects at the assembly. Bring the people who benefited to tell their stories." "It's not that simple, Sophie. These people only care about numbers." "Then let's give them numbers." Sophie's eyes shone with that same light that Richard knew so well, the light that Emily had when she found an unexpected solution. "I can do a complete survey of the economic impact of our projects, how much money families are saving with the solar sewing, how many jobs were created, how much the city will save with the water system." Richard watched in admiration as Sophie began to scribble calculations in her notebook, which she always carried with her. It was amazing how she could transform problems into projects, obstacles into opportunities. "Uncle," she stopped writing for a moment, "did Aunt Emily face resistance like this too?" "Yes, she did, but she never gave up fighting for what she believed in." "Then we won't give up either." Sophie smiled, returning to her calculations. "So you know what my mom always says? That some people build walls but others build bridges. Aunt Emily built bridges, and now it's our turn." Richard felt his eyes well up. Amid all the corporate turbulence, there was a 12-year-old girl teaching him about courage and perseverance. "Sarah," he called, his voice regaining firmness, "prepare a press conference for tomorrow and call a meeting with the entire foundation team. We have work to do." As Sophie happily returned to her model, Richard took out his cell phone and typed a message to Grace. "We need to talk. I think your daughter just taught me the true definition of leadership." The meeting room of the Emily Morgan Foundation was buzzing with activity. In the 2 weeks following the announcement of the extraordinary assembly, a silent revolution took shape. Sophie, with the help of volunteer university professors, coordinated a thorough survey of the social and economic impact of the Foundation's projects. Grace transformed the old sewing room in Spring Valley into an improvised command center, where dozens of beneficiaries of the projects gathered to share their stories. Among them Mrs. Z, who now gave sewing lessons to young apprentices using the machine developed by Sophie. "Look at this." Mrs. Z proudly showed her small workshop to the documentation team. "Before, I could barely pay the bills. Now I have 6 students and a waiting list of orders." Richard observed everything with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Sarah had confirmed that the former board members had already secured 45% of the votes needed for his removal. The empire his family had built was literally at stake. "It's not just about you," Sophie said one night as they reviewed the numbers for the 1,000th time. "It's about all these people who finally have a chance to show their worth." On the eve of the assembly, an unexpected discovery changed everything. Sarah found buried in old digital archives a document that David had kept before leaving. A detailed report on how the company's old management systematically diverted resources through inflated contracts. "This explains why some of the former board members are so desperate to regain control," Richard murmured, studying the files. "They're not just concerned about the new projects, they're afraid that old practices will come to light." The morning of the assembly arrived with a bright sun. The lobby of the Morgan Holdings headquarters building was packed. On one side, shareholders in their impeccable suits. On the other, a diverse crowd of beneficiaries from the Foundation's projects. Sophie was sitting in the front row, between Grace and Mrs. Z, her inseparable project notebook in her lap. Richard noticed that she was wearing a brooch that had belonged to Emily, a small silver gear that his sister always said was a symbol of how small pieces could move big machines. "You have been summoned today," Albert Mendenhall began, his voice resonating through the auditorium, "to discuss the future of Morgan Holdings. In recent months, we have witnessed decisions that threaten the financial stability of this centenary company." Richard let him speak. When it was his turn, he calmly rose and gave a signal. The lights went out, and a screen descended from the ceiling. "Before you vote," he said, his voice clear and firm, "I'd like to present some numbers." What followed was an impeccable presentation, the fruit of 2 weeks of intensive work. Graphics showed how the Foundation's projects had generated a social and economic return 3 times greater than the initial investment. Video testimonials revealed stories of transformation and hope. "And there's more," Richard continued, making a dramatic pause. "We found some interesting documents about the previous management." The murmur that followed the presentation of David's discoveries was intense. Albert Mendenhall visibly paled, while other former board members squirmed uncomfortably in their chairs. "But we're not here to seek revenge," Richard proceeded. "We're here to build a new future, a future where business success and social responsibility are not mutually exclusive concepts." Sophie then stood up, asking permission to speak, just as Emily would have seen. At that moment, a group of teenagers entered the hall. They were the first participants in the Young Inventors program, all coming from peripheral communities of the city. Sophie immediately put away the diary pages and went to receive them, her eyes shining with the same energy as always. "Welcome to our dream laboratory," she began, guiding the group through the space. "Here, we'll learn that technology is not just about creating new things, but about using our creativity to solve real problems." Richard and Grace observed from a distance as Sophie showed the young people every detail of the center, explaining how each project had been born from a real need in the community. "Sometimes I wonder," Grace murmured, "if David had any idea how special his daughter would be." "I'm sure he did," Richard replied, watching Sophie demonstrate the operation of one of the solar sewing machines. "But I think even he wouldn't have imagined how much she would teach us about starting over." At the end of the afternoon, as the sun set through the skylights in the roof, Sophie gathered all the young people in a circle in the center of the hall. In her hands, she held Emily's diary open to the newly discovered pages. "Before you go," she said, her voice clear and confident, "I want to share something my Aunt Emily wrote a long time ago. She said that innovation without purpose is like a star without light. It may exist, but it doesn't illuminate anyone's path." The young people listened attentively, their eyes fixed on Sophie, who continued, "Starting tomorrow, this space will be our dream laboratory. But remember, each project we develop here needs to have a purpose greater than ourselves." Richard felt his eyes well up. There was the true legacy of his family, not in the luxurious buildings of Morgan Holdings, but in that room full of young dreamers, led by a girl who had inherited not only the talent, but mainly the heart of Emily. The morning of the inauguration of the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation dawned with a surprise. At the entrance of the building, a line of people extended for several blocks. Not just invited authorities and journalists, but mainly residents of neighboring communities, all eager to see the space that promised to transform the region. Sophie was in the improvised office she had set up on the second floor, adjusting her presentation one last time. On the walls, between her own projects and Emily's drawings, there were now also works from the young people in the mentoring program, living proof that talent and creativity could flourish anywhere, as long as they received the right opportunity. "Nervous?" Richard asked, entering the room with 2 cups of hot chocolate, a tradition he had established with his niece during the long afternoons of work. "A little," Sophie admitted, accepting the cup. "But it's a good nervousness. As Aunt Emily wrote in her diary, fear only exists until the moment we begin to act." Grace arrived hurriedly, carrying a package. "I almost didn't finish it in time, but..." She extended the package to Sophie. "I thought you should wear this today." Inside the package was a navy blue blazer, custom-made on the solar sewing machine. In the pocket, a delicate embroidery reproduced. The gear that was the symbol of the center, the same one that Emily used as a brooch. "Mom," Sophie hugged Grace, moved. "It's perfect." The moment was interrupted by Sarah, who entered announcing that it was time. The inauguration ceremony was about to begin. On the stage set up in the main hall, Richard began his speech looking at the crowd that filled the space. "A year ago, when I first visited a small house in Spring Valley, I couldn't imagine that that moment would change not only my life, but the history of our company and our city." He paused, his eyes meeting Sophie's in the front row. "I found in that house not only a niece I didn't know, but a lesson about the true meaning of legacy. Emily, my sister, always said that the future is not something we wait for. It's something we build. And today, through Sophie, her dream of using technology to transform lives is becoming reality." Sophie then took the stage, her new blazer perfectly matching her confident posture. "Many people ask me why we chose to keep some of the old sewing machines from the factory on display," she began, gesturing toward the restored pieces. With a confidence that surprised everyone, she presented her newest project, a 5-year plan to transform the old textile factory into a center for social innovation. "My Aunt Emily always said that technology without purpose is like a machine without a soul," she concluded, her young voice echoing through the auditorium. "Today we have the chance to give purpose not just to technology, but to an entire company." When the voting began, the result was surprising. Not only was the removal attempt rejected, but the assembly approved by majority the expansion of the foundation's projects. After the meeting, while the room emptied, Sophie approached Richard, who was standing by the window. "Uncle," she called softly, "I found something else in Aunt Emily's diary that I think you should see." She opened the diary to one of the last pages, where Emily had written, "Perhaps I won't be here to see it, but I know that one day someone will understand that a family's true legacy is not measured in money, but in the lives we manage to transform." Richard hugged his niece, feeling that he had finally found the true meaning of those words. In the reflection of the glass, for a moment, he seemed to see Emily smile, like a silent blessing for the new path they had chosen. The old textile factory warehouse was unrecognizable. After 3 months of intensive renovation, the space that once housed industrial machines had been transformed into a bright and welcoming environment. In the center of the main hall, an exhibition told the story of the place, from the days of the old factory to its transformation into the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation. Sophie walked through the space, making final adjustments for the inauguration, which would take place the next day. In every detail of the project, her influence was visible, from the natural lighting system she had developed to the modular workstations that could be reconfigured according to the needs of each project. "What did you think of the entrance panel?" Richard asked, watching his niece adjust the position of an old sewing machine that had been transformed into an exhibition piece. "It's perfect," Sophie smiled, running her hand over the polished surface of the machine. "Especially the part that tells Aunt Emily's story. People need to know where the inspiration for all this came from." The panel in question was an interactive timeline that began with Emily's first drawings, passed through Sophie's current projects, and ended with a blank space, symbolizing the infinite possibilities of the future. Next to it, a digital screen showed a map of the city with luminous points indicating each project already implemented by the foundation. Grace entered the hall carrying some boxes. In recent months, she had become the general coordinator of the foundation's social projects, transforming her life experience into valuable knowledge for other families. "Sophie, the last kits for the Young Inventors program have arrived," she announced, placing the boxes on a table. "And there's a surprise for you too." From one of the boxes, Grace took out a yellowed envelope. "I found this doing the last cleaning at home. It had been stored for so long I had almost forgotten about it." Sophie carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there were more pages from Emily's diary, apparently torn out and hidden long ago. The pages contained projects that no one had seen before, including a revolutionary water purification system that seemed decades ahead of its time. "This is..." Sophie could barely contain her excitement. This is exactly what we needed for the Spring Valley project. With these modifications, we can make the system even more efficient. Richard observed the scene with a smile on his lips. It was fascinating how Emily's legacy continued to live on, finding new paths through Sophie. The girl was no longer just his niece or David's daughter. She had become a force of her own, a bridge between the past and the future. "There's one more thing," Grace continued, her voice soft. "The university contacted us this morning. They want to create a special scientific mentoring program for Sophie." "Really?" Sophie's eyes shone. "But I'm still in middle school." "And you already have more implemented projects than many graduated engineers," Richard completed. "They saw your potential, Sophie." "The answer is simple. So we never forget where we came from and, more importantly, where we want to go." She continued, presenting the different spaces of the center, the prototyping laboratory, the classrooms equipped with cutting-edge technology, the co-working space for community projects. But the most important things are not the equipment, she emphasized. They are the people and their stories. One by one, the young people from the mentoring program took the stage to present their projects. There were everything from smart irrigation systems for community gardens to applications connecting local artisans to buyers. Each project carried the same essence: technology with social purpose. Among the audience, Richard noticed some familiar faces, former board members who had opposed the changes in the company, now observing with expressions that mixed surprise and admiration. At his side, Grace discreetly held a handkerchief, her eyes wet with pride. At the end of the ceremony, Sophie had one last surprise. "I want to present something special," she said, signaling for a curtain to be removed. Behind it, an entire wall was covered with photographs, hundreds of them, showing each person who had been impacted by the Foundation's projects. "This is the true heart of the Emily Morgan Center," she explained, her voice choked with emotion. "Not the machines, the computers, or the projects. It's the stories of transformation, the dreams realized, the lives that have changed." Richard observed his niece with admiration. In just 1 year, Sophie had not only honored Emily's legacy, but created her own path. She had proven that the true power of innovation wasn't in technology itself, but in the purpose with which it was used. When the ceremony ended and people began to explore the space, Richard found Sophie sitting on the windowsill of one of the large windows on the second floor, observing the city. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting next to her. "About how it all began," she replied, smiling. "With a mortgage visit that should have been just another number on a spreadsheet, and transformed into a silent revolution," Richard completed, hugging his niece around the shoulders. Down below, the afternoon sun bathed the city in a golden light, and people continued entering and leaving the center, carrying with them not just folders and information, but mainly hope. The hope that, as Emily always believed, the future could be built with intelligence, creativity, and above all, with love. 6 months after the inauguration of the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation, the transformation in the region was visible. What was once just a forgotten neighborhood had become a hub of social technology, attracting attention and investments from all over the country. But with success came new challenges. Sophie was in her office at the center, analyzing the reports from the last quarter, when Grace entered with a worried expression on her face. "Honey, I think you need to see this." She extended a local newspaper, where a striking headline occupied the front page. "Real estate speculation threatens Spring Valley residents. Rental prices soar after installation of Innovation Center." Sophie felt her heart tighten. The success of the center was having a side effect she hadn't predicted. The appreciation of the region was beginning to expel the very people the project intended to help. "I've already talked to Uncle Richard about this," she said, picking up her inseparable project notebook. "Actually, I have an idea that might help." That same day, an extraordinary meeting was convened at the center. Richard, Sophie, Grace, and community representatives gathered to discuss the situation. On the screen, Sophie projected her newest project. "If the problem is housing, let's transform it into a solution," she began, showing the drawings of a sustainable housing complex. We can use the abandoned land from the old factory to create a pilot project of smart social housing. The drawings showed a set of buildings that incorporated all the technologies developed at the center: solar energy system, rainwater collection, automated community gardens. But the most innovative thing was the management model. The idea is to create a housing cooperative, Sophie explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. The residents will be collective owners of the space, and part of the units will always be reserved for families in vulnerable situations. Richard observed with admiration how his niece, at 13 years old, could see solutions that experienced executives didn't see. And how will we make this financially viable? I've thought about that too, Sophie smiled, changing the slide. We can use the microcredit program we developed with the seamstresses as a model. The residents themselves can contribute their skills in the construction and maintenance of the space. Mrs. Z, who now coordinated a network of independent seamstresses, raised her hand. And what happens to those who can't pay? That's where the most important part of the project comes in, Sophie replied, showing a complex diagram of circular economy. Each building will have commercial spaces on the ground floor, managed by the cooperative. The income generated will help subsidize the social units. Grace observed her daughter with pride. Sophie had inherited not only Emily's talent for technology, but also her humanitarian vision and her ability to think in holistic solutions. There's one more thing, Sophie continued, revealing her last surprise. I found in Aunt Emily's drawings a modular construction project that we can adapt. She had thought of all this years ago. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Emily had always been ahead of her time, thinking of solutions for problems that most people didn't even recognize as problems yet. The meeting extended through the afternoon, with the community contributing ideas and suggestions. Sophie's initial project was transforming into something even bigger, a true living laboratory of social innovation. But we can't do this alone, Sophie concluded, looking at everyone in the room. We need partners, government support, community engagement. And do you think we'll get all that? Asked one of the residents, his voice mixing hope and skepticism. Sophie smiled, picking up Emily's diary that she always carried with her. My aunt wrote something here that always inspires me. She said, "The impossible is just the possible that no one has had the courage to try yet." Richard stood up, his decision already made. Morgan Holdings will fully support the project, but with one condition, that it be totally managed by the community through the cooperative. A murmur of approval went through the room. Grace hugged her daughter, whispering in her ear, "Your father would be so proud." That night, after everyone had gone, Sophie stayed alone at the center, working on more details of the project. Through the large windows, she could see the lights of Spring Valley shining in the night, each one of them representing a family, a story, a dream. On her desk, next to the new drawings, was an old photo of Emily, smiling in front of the old factory. Sophie touched the photo gently as if seeking inspiration. "We continue your work, Aunt Emily," she murmured to herself. "And every day we discover that your dreams were bigger than we imagined." The sound of footsteps made her turn. It was Richard, carrying 2 cups of the traditional hot chocolate. "Still working?" he asked, placing one of the cups on the desk. "There's always more to do," Sophie replied, showing some more sketches. "I was thinking about how we can integrate a professional training center into the housing project." Richard smiled, recognizing in that tireless dedication the same spirit that had moved Emily throughout her life. True innovation, he was learning, wasn't just in the machines or projects, but in the ability to dream of a better world and the courage to work to make it a reality. The news arrived on a spring morning, when the trees in Spring Valley were beginning to bloom. Sophie had been selected to present her work at an International Social Innovation Congress in Barcelona. She would be the youngest speaker in the history of the event. "But I can't go alone," she argued, sitting in the kitchen at home while Grace prepared breakfast. "And I know you can't leave the projects here, Mum." "That's why I thought of a solution," Richard said, entering the kitchen with a smile on his face. "What do you think of the 3 of us going? You, your mother, and me?" Sophie's eyes sparkled, but soon after her expression became serious. "And the center, the ongoing projects. Sarah and the team can take care of everything for 2 weeks," Richard replied. "Besides, this trip isn't just about presenting your work. It's an opportunity to learn about other initiatives, bring new ideas, and learn a bit more about your family," Grace completed softly, placing on the table a box that Sophie had never seen before. Inside the box were old photos and documents. "Your Aunt Emily spent some time in Barcelona," Grace explained. "It was there that she developed some of her most important projects." Sophie picked up a yellowed photo that showed Emily in front of an old research center. Her eyes had the same gleam that Sophie saw in her own reflection when she was excited about a new project. "Why did you never tell me this before?" she asked, running her fingers over the photograph. "Because some stories need the right moment to be told," Richard replied. "And now that you're following in her footsteps in such a unique way, we thought it was time." The weeks that followed were of intense preparation. Besides organizing her presentation for the Congress, Sophie worked tirelessly to leave all the Center's projects on track. Her biggest concern was with the housing project, which was in a crucial approval phase. "The residents are worried that things will stop without you here," Mrs. Z commented during a cooperative meeting. "That's why we need to strengthen community management even more," Sophie replied, presenting a detailed transition plan. "This project can't depend on a single person. It belongs to all of us." On the eve of the trip, an exciting surprise awaited Sophie at the center. The young people from the mentoring program had organized a special exhibition with all the projects developed so far. On a central panel, they had written a phrase from Emily's diary: "True innovation is that which plants seeds for others to harvest fruits." "See?" Richard whispered to Grace, watching Sophie excitedly explain each project to visitors. "She's not just the continuation of Emily's work, she's creating her own legacy." The trip to Barcelona was a transformative experience. Sophie not only presented her work to an impressed international audience, but also discovered unknown facets of her family history. At the old research center where Emily had worked, now transformed into a social innovation museum, Sophie found more than records of her aunt's projects. She found an echo of her own dreams. "Look at this, Mom," she exclaimed, standing in front of one of Emily's old projects. "It's a renewable energy system for isolated communities, just like what we're developing in Spring Valley." "It's no coincidence," Richard smiled. "Some ideas are so important that they find their way through generations." On her last day in Barcelona, Sophie insisted on visiting a local social project that used technology to empower underprivileged communities. There, she met young people from different countries, all sharing the same dream of using innovation to transform realities. "You know what I realized?" she said to Richard and Grace as they walked through the old city at the end of the day. "What we do at the center is not something isolated. It's part of a much larger movement." "And what is this movement?" Grace asked, although she already knew the answer. "It's the movement of people who believe that technology without humanity is empty," Sophie replied, her eyes shining with the afternoon sun. As Aunt Emily wrote, "Innovation without purpose is like a compass without north." Back in the United States, Sophie brought not only new ideas and international contacts, but a deeper understanding of her role in the world. The Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation was not just a local project. It was part of a global transformation network. "And you know what's most incredible?" she commented to Richard, back in her office at the center, surrounded by her projects and Emily's eternal diary. "The more we share our ideas, the more they grow. It's as if each person who joins us brings a new piece to this great puzzle." Richard observed his niece with pride. In just over a year, she had not only honored Emily's legacy, but expanded it in ways that no one could have predicted. It was as if the universe had found a way to keep Emily's dreams alive and growing through Sophie. The most watched television program in the country had dedicated an entire special to the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation. The cameras roamed the busy corridors, capturing images of young inventors in action, the solar sewing machines in operation, and the housing project that was beginning to take shape on the adjacent lands. "It's surreal to see all this," Sophie commented to Grace as they watched the report together at home. "It seems like yesterday I was fixing that old singer in the living room." Grace smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "And it seems like yesterday I was working at the old factory, dreaming of a better future." The report especially highlighted the impact of the center on the lives of local residents. Mrs. Z, now a successful businesswoman in the textile industry, spoke about how the project had transformed not only her financial reality, but mainly her self-esteem. "Before we were invisible," she said to the camera. "Now we are protagonists of our own story." The phone rang. It was Richard, his voice loaded with emotion. "Did you see it? The governor just signed the law that makes the center's model a public state policy. They're going to create similar centers in 5 other regions." Sophie could barely contain her joy. "That means—" "Yes," Richard completed. "Your smart social housing project will be implemented on a much larger scale than we imagined." The next morning, during the center's weekly team meeting, Sophie presented her newest idea: an exchange program between the future social innovation centers. "We can create a collaboration network," she explained, showing her drawings on the EO digital board. Each center with its own specialty, but all connected, sharing knowledge and resources. Sarah, who now coordinated the administrative part of the foundation, made some notes on her tablet. "The numbers are impressive, Sophie. The potential impact of this network can reach thousands of families. Thousands of stories transformed," Sophie gently corrected. As Aunt Emily always said in her diaries, "Numbers are important, but it's the stories that change the world." During the afternoon, while supervising the installation of new equipment in the laboratory, Sophie received an unexpected visit. Albert Mendenhall, the former board member who had so opposed the changes in the company, was standing at the door, visibly embarrassed. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice softer than Sophie remembered. "Of course," she replied, indicating a chair. "Would you like to learn about our work?" Albert sat down, looking around with a mixture of admiration and regret. "You know, Sophie, I worked with your father. David was a good man, even when he didn't have the courage to show it." Sophie stopped what she was doing, her attention fully, turned to the unexpected visitor. "I came to apologize," he continued, "not just for how I acted at the assembly, but for all the years I defended a business model that ignored what really matters." "It's never too late to change," Sophie replied, remembering another phrase from Emily's diary. "True strength isn't in remaining inflexible, but in knowing how to adapt without losing your values." Albert smiled, his eyes watering. "You have Emily's wisdom. She always managed to see the best in people even when they didn't see it in themselves. Did you know her well? She was my intern, did you know? Before the divergences with your father about the direction of the company." He paused, as if organizing old memories. "Emily had that same light in her eyes that I see in you, that certainty that it's possible to do things differently." The conversation was interrupted by a group of children who came running into the B laboratory. It was time for the basic robotics workshop, one of the most popular programs at the center. "Would you like to stay and watch?" Sophie invited. "Maybe even participate." To her surprise, Albert accepted. For the next 2 hours, the hardline former board member found himself totally involved, helping children assemble small robots with recycled material. Late in the afternoon, Richard found Sophie in her office working on new projects. "I heard we had an interesting visit today. It's amazing how people can change, isn't it?" Sophie smiled, showing Richard her new drawing, a participatory management system for the network of innovation centers. "Emily used to say that the greatest transformations begin in the most unlikely places," Richard commented, sitting next to his niece. "Uncle," Sophie hesitated for a moment, "do you think we're really making a difference, that all this will last?" Richard looked out the window, where the sun was setting over Spring Valley. On the horizon, he could see the structures of the housing project beginning to rise, like concrete symbols of hope. "You know what I learned from you, Sophie? That legacy isn't something we leave behind. It's something we build every day, with each person we touch, each life we transform." Sophie smiled, turning her attention back to the projects. On her desk, Emily's diary was open to a page she had read hundreds of times. The future doesn't belong to those with more resources, but to those with more dreams and courage to realize them. Outside, Spring Valley continued its transformation, not just physical but mainly human. It was as if each brick of the housing project, each machine at the center, each smile of the children in the workshops was a small part of a greater dream. A dream that began with Emily, gained new life through Sophie, and now belonged to everyone. The first unit of the housing project was finally ready. It was a historic day not just for Spring Valley, but for the entire city. The building, with its modern and sustainable lines, stood out in the landscape, not for its opulence but for its harmonious integration with the surroundings. Sophie was on the green terrace of the building, checking the operation of the solar panels she had designed, when she heard familiar footsteps. It was Grace, carrying Emily's inseparable diary and a mysterious expression on her face. "Honey, I found something I think you need to see," she said, sitting on one of the benches in the suspended garden. "It's about your father, and about Emily." Sophie approached, curious. Grace opened the diary to a page that seemed to have been pasted. In later, it was a letter from David to Emily, dated a few days before she left. "Dear sister," Sophie began to read aloud, "I know you're disappointed in me. Your words about social responsibility and business purpose echo in my mind every day. You were right, you always were. But I didn't have your courage to confront our father, to do what was right. Now I carry two guilts, having abandoned Grace and our daughter, and having failed you who always believed I could be better." Sophie's voice faltered. Grace placed her hand on her shoulder, giving her strength to continue. "But I promise that one day I'll fix everything. I'll recognize my daughter, I'll transform the company into what you always dreamed. I just need a little more time, a little more courage." "He never had that time," Grace completed softly. "But look around you, Sophie. You're realizing not just Emily's dreams, but also the redemption your father so sought." Sophie wiped away, a tear that insisted on falling. Below them, she could see families beginning to arrive for the building's inauguration. Mrs. Z coordinated a group of seamstresses who had created all the curtains and upholstery for the common areas using the solar machines. Richard arrived at the terrace, accompanied by a team of international documentarians. The project had caught the attention of an important global social innovation organization. "Everyone's waiting for you downstairs," he said to Sophie. "It's time for your speech." In the spacious community hall on the ground floor, dozens of families crowded, their eyes shining with expectation. Sophie took the small, improvised stage, taking Emily's diary with her. "A long time ago," she began, her voice clear and firm, "an extraordinary woman wrote that a house isn't made just of walls and roof, but of dreams and hope. My Aunt Emily understood that technology and humanity aren't opposite concepts. They're parts of the same whole." She paused, looking at the attentive faces in the audience. "This building we're inaugurating today isn't just a place to live. It's a symbol that it's possible to do things differently. Each apartment here was thought to be more than a space. It was thought to be a home," Sophie continued, explaining how the cooperative management system would work, how the common areas would be used for income generation projects, how technology had been integrated to improve the residents' quality of life. "But most importantly," she concluded, "this is just the beginning. With the new state law, other social innovation centers are being created. Other housing projects like this will be born. Because, as my Aunt Emily always said, the best ideas are like seeds in the wind. Once planted, no one can prevent them from blooming." After the ceremony, while families explored their new homes, Sophie found a moment of quiet in the community garden on the ground floor. There, among the vertical gardens and automated irrigation systems she had designed, she felt a deep peace. Richard found her there, contemplating the sunset. "What are you thinking about?" "About how everything is connected," she replied, smiling. "The old factory, my father's story, Aunt Emily's dreams, your first visit to our house. It's as if each moment was a necessary piece for us to get here." "And where do you think we'll get to?" Sophie took a new notebook from her pocket, her own project diary. "This is just the beginning, Uncle. There's still so much to do, so many lives to transform." Richard smiled, recognizing in his niece's eyes that same light that Emily had, the light of someone who sees possibilities where others see only problems. "You know what else I found in my father's letter?" Sophie asked, her voice soft. "At the end, he wrote, 'Perhaps I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope that one day someone in our family will finish what you started, Emily. Someone with your vision and your courage.' And that person is you, Sophie." "No," she gently corrected. "It's all of us. Every person who believes it's possible to build a better world. Everyone who allows themselves to dream and act. As it says here in Aunt Emily's diary, the true legacy isn't what we build alone, but what we inspire others to build with us." The sun had already set when Sophie finally left the garden. In the sky, the first stars were beginning to shine, like small points of light, guiding the way to a future that, thanks to dreamers like Emily and Sophie, seemed increasingly possible. The auditorium of the university was packed for the ceremony of the National Social Innovation Award. In the front row, Sophie nervously adjusted the badge that identified her not only as a finalist, but as the youngest candidate in the history of the award. "Take a deep breath," Grace whispered, holding her daughter's hand. "You're ready for this." The Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation had been nominated in 3 categories: Sustainable Technology, Social Impact, and the main award of Innovation of the Year. But for Sophie, the true victory was already in the transformation stories that populated the corridors of the center. Richard took the stage as one of the presenters of the night. His opening speech caught everyone's attention. "2 years ago, a routine work visit completely changed my vision of the meaning of business, success. I discovered that true value isn't in the numbers on a spreadsheet, but in the lives we can transform." The lights went out, and a video began to be shown on the screen. It was a special production about the center, but with a different focus. It showed the behind the scenes, the personal stories, the small moments that made the difference. Sophie saw herself on screen, younger, fixing her first sewing machine. She saw Grace teaching other women to use the new equipment. She saw Mrs. Z presenting her first clothing collection. She saw the children from the robotics program celebrating their creations. But the most emotional moment was when old images of Emily appeared, interspersed with scenes of the center's current work. The similarity between the projects, the dreams, the visions of the future was impressive. Emily Morgan's legacy, the video narrated, isn't just in the center's name, but in the spirit of innovation with purpose that inspires a new generation of social transformers. When the lights came on, many in the audience were discreetly wiping away tears. The president of the jury took the microphone. "This year, we have something unprecedented to announce. Besides the traditional categories, we've created a special award, the Emily Morgan Award for Humanitarian Innovation." Sophie felt her heart accelerate. Grace squeezed her hand more tightly. "This award," continued the president, "will be granted annually to projects that, like Emily Morgan's pioneering work, manage to unite technical excellence with profound social impact. How each place adds its own identity to the project, creating something unique." Richard arrived shortly after, accompanied by the international visitors. Among them was Carmen Rodriguez, a renowned social innovation expert from Latin America. "It's impressive to see how you managed to create a complete ecosystem of transformation," Carmen commented, as Sophie guided the group through the center. "It's not just about technology or housing, it's about dignity, about giving people back the power to be protagonists of their stories." The tour included a visit to the housing complex, now fully occupied and managed by the local cooperative. On the green terrace, Mrs. Z coordinated a group of seamstresses, who, besides producing for famous brands, now also had their own collections. "The most important thing," Sophie explained to the visitors, "is that each project is born from the real needs of the community. We don't impose solutions, we create spaces for people to develop their own answers." During lunch, served at the center's community restaurant, Sophie presented her newest project, a digital platform to connect social innovation centers around the world. "Imagine," she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, "a global network where each center can share experiences, technologies, and solutions, where knowledge has no borders." "How Emily would have loved to see this," Richard whispered to Grace, watching Sophie present the technical details of the platform. After the meeting, when the visitors had already left, Sophie found a moment to visit her favorite place in the center, the library, where a special section kept not only Emily's diary, but now also a growing collection of projects developed by the community. "Sometimes I wonder," she said to Richard, who had followed her, "if Aunt Emily imagined that her ideas would go so far." "I think she knew," Richard replied, picking up the diary carefully. "Look at this." He opened to a page that Sophie had never noticed before. It was a drawing by Emily, done in pencil, showing a network of connections that spread like a web across the paper. In the center, she had written, "The future doesn't belong to one place or one person. It belongs to all who have the courage to dream and share their dreams." Sophie touched the drawing gently. "It's exactly what we're building now." "And you know what's most beautiful?" Richard smiled. "Each person who passes through here takes a bit of that dream with them, like those seeds that the wind carries far away, creating new gardens where least expected." At that moment, a group of children ran past the corridor, carrying prototypes of their projects for the center's science fair. Sophie smiled, remembering herself not too long ago bent over her first sewing machine. "Uncle," she called, her voice soft, "do you think we'll ever know the true reach of what we're doing here?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Emily wrote something about that too. She said that the true impact of our actions is like a stone thrown into a lake. The waves continue expanding long after the stone sinks." Sophie picked up her own project notebook, now almost as full as Emily's. "Then let's keep throwing stones," she smiled, showing Richard her new drawings, "because each wave can carry a seed of transformation." Outside, the sun was beginning to set over Spring Valley, painting the sky with colors that seemed to celebrate each small victory, each dream realized, each life transformed. At the center, lights were beginning to turn on, like earthly stars illuminating the path to a future that, thanks to people like Emily and Sophie, continued expanding in infinite possibilities. Grace found them both still in the library. "Time to go home," she said softly. "Tomorrow we have a lot of work ahead." Sophie put away her notebook, but before leaving she looked one last time at Emily's diary. "You know something," she said, smiling. "I think we'll never really finish what we started here, and that's the most beautiful thing of all." "Why?" Richard asked, although he already knew the answer. "Because each end is just the beginning of something even bigger," Sophie replied, once again quoting Emily's words. "And as long as there are people willing to dream and build together, there will always be new horizons to explore." It was a special morning at the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation, and we couldn't have a more appropriate inauguration than to deliver it to someone who not only carries her legacy forward, but expands it in ways that even Emily couldn't have imagined. Sophie took the stage to thunderous applause. Upon receiving the award, a statue in the shape of a gear intertwined with an olive branch, her hands trembled slightly. Emily always said in her diary that innovation without purpose is like a compass without north, she began her speech. But today I understand that purpose without action is like a map without a journey. What we do at the center isn't just about creating technology. It's about creating possibilities. She paused, her eyes meeting those of Richard and Grace in the audience. "Many ask me what it's like to carry Emily Morgan's legacy. The truth is that I don't carry it alone. Each person who passes through the center, each life that is transformed, each dream that becomes reality, we all carry this legacy together." In the front row, Albert Mendenhall, the former board member who was now one of the center's greatest supporters, smiled with emotion. Next to him, Sarah discreetly filmed everything with her tablet. "But today I want to talk about another legacy as well," Sophie continued, her voice gaining strength. "The legacy of my father, David Morgan, a man who didn't have the chance to correct his mistakes in life, but whose regret and desire for change planted seeds that now bloom through our work." A murmur of surprise ran through the auditorium. It was the first time Sophie had spoken publicly about David. "And I want to talk about my mother, Grace Wilson," she smiled at Grace, who was now openly crying. "A woman who transformed difficulties into strength, who taught me that talent without perseverance is like a flower without roots." Sophie raised the award. This statue doesn't just represent an achievement, it represents a promise. The promise that we will continue expanding the horizons of the possible, that we will continue building bridges where others see only walls. She took a page from Emily's diary from her pocket. My aunt wrote something that today makes more sense than ever. The future isn't a place we go to, it's a place we create. Each act of innovation, each gesture of compassion, each courageous choice is a brick in the construction of that future. The auditorium erupted in applause. On the screen, images of the center alternated with photos of Emily, creating a visual bridge between past and present. Later, during the reception, Sophie found a moment of quiet in the university garden. Richard found her there, contemplating the stars. "You know what's most incredible?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the sky. "Every time we reach a goal, we discover that there are even more possibilities ahead. It's as if each answer we find brings us new, even more interesting questions." Richard smiled, recognizing in his niece's words the same tireless enthusiasm of Emily. "And what are the next questions you want to answer?" Sophie took her project notebook from her bag, showing pages and pages of new drawings and ideas. "The world is much bigger than Spring Valley, Uncle. There are so many communities needing transformation, so many stories waiting to be rewritten." The stars shone in the sky like small beacons of possibility, each one of them a reminder that dreams, when shared, have the power to illuminate not just one path but infinite horizons. The sun was rising over Spring Valley, illuminating a neighborhood that now barely resembled that forgotten place of 2 years ago. The Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation pulsed with life from the early hours of the morning. Its doors always open to those who wanted to transform dreams into reality. Sophie was in her office, organizing the final details for the most important meeting since the center's inauguration. Representatives from 3 countries had traveled there to learn about the project and discuss its implementation in other realities. "I still can't believe we've come so far," Grace commented, entering the office with a stack of reports. "I remember as if it was yesterday, you fixing sewing machines in our living room. And now we're exporting the model to other countries," Sophie completed, smiling. "But you know what's most incredible, Mom? The place was prepared for the graduation ceremony of the first class of the Young Inventors program, coinciding with the 3rd anniversary of the center. On the auditorium stage, a surprise awaited all those present. The old sewing machine that Sophie had fixed in her living room years ago occupied a prominent place. "It's amazing how an object can carry so many stories," Grace commented, helping Sophie organize the medals that would be given to the graduates. Each one had a small gear engraved, a symbol that had become the trademark of the center. Richard entered the auditorium carrying a mysterious box. "Sophie, we found this in the old company archives. I think today is the perfect day to share." Inside the box was a video, recorded by Emily shortly before her departure. Sophie, Grace, and Richard gathered in the projection room to watch. On the screen, Emily appeared, young and determined, speaking directly to the camera. "If someone is watching this, it means my ideas have found fertile soil to grow. I've always believed that innovation without social purpose is like a flower without roots. It might even be beautiful, but it doesn't survive time. I try to imagine what the future will be like, who will continue these dreams." Sophie felt silent tears running down her face. It was the first time she had heard her aunt's voice. "But one thing I know," Emily continued in the video, "the true power of transformation isn't in the machines we create, but in the bridges we build between people. Each project I developed carries this hope, that one day someone will understand. That technology is just a tool for something much greater, the construction of a more just and humane world." Richard paused the video for a moment, everyone needing time to process the emotion. Grace hugged Sophie, who was trembling slightly. "She knew," Sophie whispered. "Somehow she knew that one day someone would continue her work." When they resumed the video, Emily showed some of her projects, including initial sketches of what would become the solar energy system that Sophie had perfected. "I leave these drawings as seeds," Emily concluded, "not as blueprints to be followed, but as inspiration for others to create their own paths. Because the future I dream of isn't a distant place, It's something we build together, every day. The video ended, but its impact would remain forever in the hearts of those present. Sophie stood up, wiping away the tears, a new determination in her gaze. Let's use this in the ceremony, she decided. The graduates need to understand that they're part of something bigger, a story that began long before them. The graduation ceremony was much more than a simple certificate delivery. Each of the 50 young graduates presented a project that was already being implemented in their communities. There were everything from smart irrigation systems for urban agriculture to shared economy applications. When it was her turn to speak, Sophie took the stage, bringing with her both Emily's diary and her own project notebook. 3 years ago, I was just a girl fixing sewing machines, she began, her voice firm and emotional. Today, I stand before 50 young inventors who, like me, discovered that talent and purpose can transform realities. Emily's video was shown, causing general commotion. Many of those present had never seen images of her, only knew her story and her legacy. But most importantly, Sophie continued after the video, is to understand that each of you now carries a responsibility, not just to create and innovate, but to keep this chain of transformation alive. Among the audience, Mrs. Z was crying silently. Next to her, several of the seamstresses who had started in the original project held their own mentor medals, now responsible for training new generations. The Emily Morgan Center isn't just a place, Sophie proceeded, her voice gaining strength. It's a movement that believes technology without humanity is empty, that innovation without purpose is sterile, that knowledge without sharing is like a light under a cup. It doesn't illuminate any path. Richard observed his niece with pride, recognizing, in her words, not just Emily's teachings, but also a wisdom of her own, born from her experiences and achievements. Each of you, Sophie addressed the graduates, is now a guardian of this legacy. Not to repeat it, but to expand it, transform it, adapt it to the needs of your own communities. Grace, seated in the front row, held tightly to the small gear-shaped brooch that had belonged to Emily and was now worn by Sophie on special occasions. And always remember, Sophie concluded, her voice charged with emotion, that the greatest project we can develop isn't made of circuits or algorithms, but of shared dreams and multiplied hopes. When the 50 young people went up on stage to receive their medals, each carrying their projects and their stories, the auditorium vibrated with a special energy. It was as if Emily's spirit was present, smiling to see how her small seed had transformed into a forest of possibilities. The sunset painted the sky with shades of pink and gold as Sophie walked through the now silent corridors of the center. The graduation ceremony had ended, but she felt the need for a moment alone to absorb everything that had happened on that special day. Her steps led her to the small memorial they had created for Emily, where the newly discovered video now played, on a loop on a discrete screen. Next to it, a display case protected the first sewing machine she had fixed, along with Emily's original diary and various other objects that told the center's story. "I knew I'd find you here," Richard's voice sounded softly behind her. He approached, carrying 2 cups of the traditional hot chocolate that had become their private ritual. "I was thinking about how it all began," Sophie smiled, accepting the cup. "With a simple mortgage visit. That transformed into the greatest lesson of my life," Richard completed, sitting beside his niece. Grace joined them, bringing a surprise, a new diary, its blue cover still untouched. "I found this morning when I was arranging things. For the move, it had been stored for a long time." Sophie took the diary carefully. On the first page, she recognized David's handwriting. "To my daughter, whom I haven't yet met but already love, may you have the courage I lacked and the vision your Aunt Emily always had." "He bought this when he found out about the pregnancy," Grace explained softly. "I never had the courage to give it to you before." Sophie hugged the diary to her chest, feeling connected to a part of her history that always seemed distant. "It's perfect to begin the next chapter," she smiled through the tears. "Next chapter?" Richard asked, although he already knew the answer. Sophie opened her project folder, spreading drawings on the nearby table. "The international network of social innovation centers is growing faster than we imagined. We have partnership, requests from more than 20 countries. "And you want to coordinate all of them?" Grace asked, although the gleam in her daughter's eyes already answered her question. "I want to build bridges," Sophie replied, her eyes fixed on Emily's video, as Aunt Emily always dreamed, not just technological bridges, but bridges between people, between different realities, between dreams. Richard smiled, recognizing in that moment the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't just about continuing a work started by others, but about transforming it into something new, something bigger. "You know what else I found in Aunt Emily's diary?" Sophie asked, leafing through the pages of the notebook that had guided her so much. "A phrase that I think sums up everything we've lived until now. The true miracle isn't in creating something new, but in creating something that allows others to create too." Through the center's windows, they could see Spring Valley's lights, turning on, each one representing a story of transformation. In the housing complex, families gathered for another community planning evening. In the robotics laboratory, some young people were still working on their projects, tireless in their search for innovative solutions. "And you know what's most beautiful?" Sophie continued, her eyes shining with that familiar light of someone who sees possibilities where others see only challenges. "Each person who passes through here takes a seed with them. Each project that's born is like a new beginning. There's no end to this story. There are only infinite new beginnings." Grace picked up the new diary, opening it to the first blank page. "Then it's time to start writing the next chapter." Sophie took her favorite pen, the one she always used to make her technical drawings. On the first page of the new diary, she wrote with a firm hand, "To all who dare to dream and build bridges, because the future isn't a place we go to, it's a place we create together, every day." Richard observed the scene with a full heart. From a simple mortgage visit, a silent revolution had been born that continued to expand, touching more and more lives, transforming more and more realities. "Emily would be proud," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. Sophie smiled, gently closing the new diary. "She is, Uncle, somehow she is. And she'll continue to live in every project born here, in every dream that comes true, in every bridge we build." Outside, night had completely fallen, but the Emily Morgan Center for Social Innovation continued to shine like a beacon of hope